Okay, well, I guess. All right, how many people are from the Washington area? How many are from outside Washington? How many people want to be from the Washington area? How many people came here because they want to figure out what to do with the rest of their life? Anybody? How many already know what they're doing? Okay, so I have 10 minutes to tell you everything you need to know about the rest of your life. And here's what I'm going to try to do. As you've heard, I'm a person who got very lucky in life. I came from very modest circumstances. My parents did not graduate from college or high school. I needed to get scholarships to go to college and law school. My father worked in the post office his entire life, made about $7,000 a year maximum. So it was a great advantage growing up that way. It didn't seem that way at the time, perhaps, but if you realize you have to do something on your own, you can work harder and perhaps maybe accomplish more in life. And so my own children probably have a disadvantage because they probably have grown up in a wealthier circumstance. It's very difficult, as all of you know, to raise children. The hardest thing in the world to do is to raise children and have them grow up happy and healthy, particularly if they're Jewish, grow up happy and healthy. I came to Washington to do good. I thought I wanted to give back to my country. I was inspired by John Kennedy's famous speech, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." So I did come to Washington. I wanted to work in the White House. I got lucky. I got a job as a Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States when I was 27. I wasn't qualified for the job, but many people in the administration weren't qualified. I felt I fit in. I managed to get inflation to 19%, and the country didn't want me to stay. So ultimately, I left. I went back to practice law, but I wasn't really good at it. My clients repeatedly said, you know, maybe you should do something else. And so my life changed 27 years ago. I wasn't a good lawyer. I wasn't very good in public policy. And so I decided to do something different. And many of you have taken a chance in your life, and maybe it worked out. In some cases, maybe it didn't. In my case, I got very, very lucky. I brought some people in with me, and I started the first buyout firm in Washington, D.C. And it grew to be one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And now I'm in a position to not only run this company, it's a public company with my co-CEO, but I am in a position to give back to the country in ways that I really couldn't give back when I was in the White House getting inflation to 19%. And so what I decided to do is to give away not just half my wealth, but essentially all my wealth, because I feel very lucky to come from very modest circumstances with a last name like mine and rise up to the position to have the kind of wealth that I'm now fortunate to have. And so I don't think I could have done this in other countries, and I've decided to give it back to the country in many different ways. I've called this patriotic philanthropy, which is to say, to recognize how wonderful this country is, how unique the freedoms are and rights we have in this country. While it's imperfect in many ways and has had many problems over the years, and we're still struggling with some of these problems, generally I think there's no country in the world that is as good as the United States. And so I want to give back to the United States and do something that I can say, I feel that my time on this earth was worthwhile. We're only here for a very short period of time, and we're very insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Over 2 weekends ago, we kicked off the Smithsonian Capital Campaign, and I'm one of the co-chairs of it, and I had a chance to interview Jim Lovell. And Jim Lovell, you all know from Apollo 13, was the person who was on that famous mission. And of course, I asked him why NASA didn't recognize that 13 is an unlucky number and just skip 13 and go right to 14. But anyway, he didn't know why they used Apollo 13. But the thing that I was most focused on was not the Apollo 13 mission, but Apollo 8. Some of you may remember that was the first time that humans had gone around the Earth and exited the orbit of the Earth and gone to the moon. He wasn't designed to land on the moon, but to orbit the moon. And that was in 1968. And he and two of his colleagues, Bill Anders and Frank Borman, were the first humans that actually went to the moon. They went around it 10 times, and some of you may remember on the 9th time, on Christmas Day, 1968, they read a passage as they saw the Earth rising, the first humans ever to see the Earth rising. They read, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth," and they went through the beginning of Genesis. And then I remember Jim Lovell said he put his thumb up, and he could block out the entire Earth. And his entire life had revolved around the Earth, as all of ours has, but you could block it out with just your thumb. And he began to realize how insignificant the Earth is in the grand scheme of things, and how finite we all are, relatively speaking. And so that brought home to me what I'd already realized, that if you're going to do something meaningful with your life, try to pick something that you think is justifies your existence on the face of the earth. None of us really know why we're here. All of us have tried different things that make us feel that we've done something useful. We're here for 60, 70, 80 years, whatever it might be, but you have to do something useful. So one of the things I'm trying to do in addition to the difficult problem of raising children and making them happy and healthy, is to give back to the country. And as I say, I call this patriotic philanthropy. One of the things I tried to do was to restore the Washington Monument. It had earthquake damage. As you know, what I did is I said to the head of the Park Service, I'll put up the money, just repair it. He later came back to me and said, well, Congress is upset because they want to get some credit for doing something, so can they share the credit? I said, okay, they can put up half the money. And at one point I was asked if I wanted to climb up on the scaffolding. And they were scaffolding. Some of you may remember it was brilliantly lit, and some people said keep the scaffolding up forever because it looked better, but we ultimately took it down. But they asked me to go up and see at the top of the Washington Monument, have the greatest view you can have in Washington. It's 555 feet up. And so I got there one Saturday morning. The Secretary of Interior said she would like to go up with me. I said, okay, but she said she's a mountain climber, and it would be humiliated to take the elevator up. She wanted to climb up. I said, well, I wouldn't be humiliated. And she said she climbed Mount Rainier 7 times. I said, well, I've flown over Mount Rainier 7 times, but anyway, is there a defibrillator around? If there is, I'll go up. So I climbed up, and they harnessed me and finally get to the top 555 feet. And I'm looking around. The Secretary of Interior is looking this way. The head of the Park Service this way. And when they weren't looking at me, I took my pen out, and I put my initials at the very top of the Washington Monument. So if you ever get there, you'll see my initials. One other time, I happened to be in New York, and somebody invited me to a viewing of the Magna Carta. And I said, what is it doing here? There's Magna Carta. It's in England. It's 1215. But it turns out there's 17 copies of the Magna Carta, but only one in private hands that Ross Perot had owned. And he was putting up for a sale because he wanted to use the money for Iraqi war veterans' medical relief, and he had put it up for sale. It was the only one in private hands and the only one in the United States. It had been on display at the National Archives. And a light bulb went off in my head and said, we can't let this escape from the United States because it was the inspiration for the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. So I just resolved that night to go back and buy the Magna Carta the next night. Now, it sounds presumptuous to say I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta. I didn't want to tell anybody. They'd think I was silly. So I went back the next night, and they put me in a little room, and I'm bidding, and all of a sudden I can't hear that well from the telephone they put me in, and I didn't know whether I won or I didn't. They came in and said, okay, you just bought the Magna Carta. Who are you? They didn't know who I was. I said, well, I can explain who I am. I'd never been to Sotheby's before. They said, okay, it's yours. You have the money for this, right? I said, yes, I do. So they said, okay, we can slip out the side door and nobody will know who owns it, or you can talk to these 100 reporters. And I said, I'll talk to them. And I went out and said, I want to give this to the United States as a down payment on my obligation to repay the country for the great fortune I've had. And so it's now on permanent display at the National Archives. I hope all of you will get to see it. And I've subsequently bought other historic documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, try to put them in places where people will see them. One other thing that was mentioned is, it's not my greatest focus, but I did want to do something to help the National Zoo. I was told they didn't have the money to keep the pandas here, so I said, okay, I'll put up the money to help the pandas. It turns out that there are only 1,600 pandas in the entire face of the earth. There's 7 billion people, 1,600 pandas. Why are there so few pandas? That's because they don't reproduce quite the way humans do. A female panda goes into estrus only for 4 hours a day, 1 day a year. So they only get to do this 4 hours a day, 1 day a year, and therefore they're inexperienced. So when they come together, they fight over each other. The parts don't go where they're supposed to go. In China, they show them movies of what to do. They show pandas movies of pandas mating. They call it panda porn, and it's designed to give them the picture of what to do, but it doesn't have the same effect as it does with human beings, apparently. So they don't really know they have to artificially inseminate them. In fact, in the Washington Zoo, when they came together for a 4-hour period about a year ago, they fought, as they typically do. They artificially inseminated the female. They said to me, would you like to see the artificial insemination? I said, no. They said, would you like to see the semen extracted from the male? Absolutely not. I don't want to see that either. But it worked out, and we now have a baby panda, and, you know, I analogize it to members of Congress. Members of Congress know what they're supposed to do, but they don't know how to do it, and the pandas are the same way. So, all of you have a chance to listen to a lot of great speakers here. All of them are trying to do something to make the country better, and all of you are as well. Many of them are government speakers, and they've worked in government, and they're obviously trying to make the country a better place. My point is, you don't have to be in the government, really, to make the country a better place. Try to do something that makes the country a better place, giving your time, your energy, your ideas, to try to make this country a slightly better place than it already is. It's a wonderful country, but we all can contribute in many different ways, use our skills and so forth to give back to the country. I call it patriotic philanthropy. You might call it something else, but please, think about what you can do to make this country a better place, because we're only here for a short period of time. And when you put your thumb up to the earth, or you put your thumb up to the moon, the sun, you realize how insignificant all of us really are. But you have a chance to be more significant if you give back to the country. Thank you very much.